Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Season 3 of the Finding Hope with OMS 10th anniversary edition of our webinar season. Thank you again for joining us tonight, or this afternoon, or this morning, wherever you're joining us from. Where we'll be welcoming back Dr. Aaron Boster for another episode in our Ask Aaron series. My name's Sian Southwood. I'm the head of programs here at OMS, and I'm joining you from London in the UK. In a moment, I'll of course be welcoming Dr. Boster onto the stage. But before I do that, I just wanted to run through a bit of housekeeping to keep the webinar running as smoothly as possible. You will notice, of course, that the webinar is being recorded, and you will be sent a link automatically in the next couple of days with a link back to this recording of the session, but also other webinar episodes. And we're hoping to run to the 60-minute time that we've allowed. Sometimes we will run over. Because it is a Zoom webinar, you'll notice that there's no audio or video component for our participants. However, it is interactive. You are able to post questions below, and we've also had quite a few questions posted via the inbox, so thank you very much for that. If you are experiencing any technical glitches, then we advise that you access the webinar through your Chrome browser and log in and log out and log back in again. And as you exit the webinar, there will be a short survey that will pop up, and that if you do have the time to fill that in, that would be great. That just helps us to improve the webinars going forward, but also to listen to what you would like to see as part of the webinars going forward. So now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome Aaron back to the stage, or onto the stage even. Hi, Aaron, how are you?
Hey, Sian, lovely to be back. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. The session that we held back in December was so popular. We're really pleased to have you back. We had lots of questions.
Wonderful.
We had lots of questions during that session, but also, of course, we've had lots posted ahead of this one. So we'll get to those in a minute. But I just wondered if you wouldn't mind just giving us a brief intro about your history for that. I'm sure lots of our participants know you, but we can't assume that everybody does. So if you don't mind.
With pleasure. Hello, howdy, hi. My name's Aaron Boster. I'm a native of sunny Columbus, Ohio, and that's in the Midwestern United States. I'm a board certified neurologist and specialist in multiple sclerosis. I decided to go into MS when I was 12. Not because my uncle had MS, he had MS from my earliest memory, to be honest. But I remember very vividly coming into the kitchen. My mother and my grandmother were holding hands. They were crying. They were super frustrated because they couldn't get a hold of their doctor, and they were scared and they felt alone and they didn't know what to do. And I told my mom that I would learn to do it better. I didn't know what I was telling her. I didn't know that I was going to do 27 years of school, or that I would go bald long before I finished my training. I just knew that nobody should make my family feel that alone and that scared. And so that kind of led me on a sort of a mission-driven plan to help improve the lives of people impacted by MS. I'm the founder and president of the Boster Center for MS in Columbus, Ohio, where we care for families impacted by MS from around the globe. And I maintain a YouTube presence with the YouTube channel, which is my name, Aaron Boster, MD, where I intend to educate and empower and energize people impacted by MS. And so it's a delight that I get to join you again, and I'm looking forward to these questions.
Great. Thank you, Aaron. I should actually give a bit of credit to Christy in the background. She's hidden, but she is our sort of digital wizard in the background, fielding all the questions. So a big up to Christy. What we will do is we'll start with some of the questions that we've had posed ahead of today, if that's okay, Aaron. And I must give a little bit of a disclaimer of, if I get some of the pronunciation wrong, then, audience, please bear with me, but also Aaron, do forgive. So we'll get through it together, I'm sure. Okay. So we've had one question, Aaron. A lady says that her daughter was diagnosed at age 11. She has multiple brain and spine lesions and is currently 12 years old and on Ocrevus. What would your advice be to all those young kids out there and their parents who have been diagnosed? And how do we remove the fear factor for the future that Google searches can create?
That is the beginning of a dissertation. That's multiple questions, and let's spend a few minutes and kind of unpack that, Sean. And maybe the best way to approach it is to start from the back and work forward. The person who wrote the question said a lot of really, really important things. For starters, notice that the unit is not the child, the unit is the family.
Yeah.
And I think when you're dealing with a pediatric onset multiple sclerosis, it is paramount that the family is the unit, because it's going to take a village to help a young person in particular live their very best life and make it through adolescence and into young adulthood and be a successful human. They're going to need that village. And so I really like the way they framed the question, just for starters. Now, people impacted by MS who have an onset of symptoms pre-puberty, we call that pediatric onset MS. And whereas people with pediatric onset MS tend to get worse slower over time, they start from a younger age. And so they risk becoming disabled at a young chronologic age because they've had the disease for a longer period. Moreover, the fact that we hear that this young person, this 12-year-old, has a lot of lesions in the brain and a lot of lesions in the spinal cord, those are independent risk factors for a more aggressive disease, particularly the spinal cord lesions. And so having them on a highly effective medicine, to me, is very, very appropriate. Ocrevus is a highly effective medicine. Now, to answer her or his question directly, let's talk about helping your child be 5 for 5 in their fight against MS. This is an effort for the entire family to ensure that this young person with MS is 5 for 5. So number one, we want to make sure that they don't smoke things. And very few parents say things like, "Smoke up, Johnny." But the reality is that if a young person smokes, they speed up their disease process by 50%. And so they can actually make themselves much worse by smoking in a very significant fashion. And so we would want to be very upfront talking to young people about the risks of smoking, and in particular, if they have MS. So that's number one, is not to smoke stuff. I would extend my comments to smoking, not just tobacco, but also cannabis. But the second comment is to supplement low levels of vitamin D. And both in Great Britain and in the Midwestern United States, we don't have the sun all year long. There's ample time where there's cloud cover and there's not a lot of sun. Of course, when there is sun, we're told to stay away from it because we could get burned. And so we don't have an opportunity to develop vitamin D from the sun. And lower levels of vitamin D drive the disease faster. And so supplementing this young person's vitamin D level with D3, or by going out in the sun for 15 minutes, in a halter top, you would absorb about 5,000 international units. This is going to help raise your vitamin D level, and it's going to help slow down that young person's multiple sclerosis. Number three is to have exercise as part of their lifestyle. And so we need to, as a family, engage in exercise as part of lifestyle, and so that we can demonstrate in best behaviors. And I would encourage the entire family to embrace exercise. When it's nice outside, you go for a walk, and kayaking and canoeing and what have you. And we have excellent data that people impacted by MS that exercise as part of their lifestyle end up less disabled at the end of their life as compared to if they didn't. And so we want to help instill those important, very, very important behaviors in a young person as early as possible. So the fourth thing is to take a medicine and make sure it's working. And if I can be more specific, to take the most effective medicine that young person is comfortable taking and make sure it's working. Now, as I mentioned, I think Ocrevus is a fantastic drug, and we would want to make sure that there were no new spots on MRI. In a young person, I would get a spine and a brain annually to monitor. I would want to make sure that their neurological examination, including cognitive assessments, are not waning, because there's a high risk that there could be some slippage there. And so we'd want to watch that. And we want to help cultivate a relationship where that young person felt comfortable saying, "Hey, I'm having a problem," because we want to hear whether they're failing or passing the litmus test of life to determine whether that Ocrevus is working. Now, in the spirit of being 5 for 5, number 5 is to practice daily mindfulness, something that a teenager doesn't do very readily. Again, the unit is the family, not the human. And so the family needs to engage in mindful meals, where we turn off the damn TV and we turn off the iPad and the music, and we actually do something which was very, very keen in the 50s and 60s and 70s. We talk to one another and we actually look at our food and we eat our food and we smell it and we spend a moment in the present. And so really, I would want that person to help their young child be 5 for 5 in their fight against MS.
That's great. Thank you, Aaron. Really, really sensible. And, some of that's really obvious, but I think just having that 5 for 5, I'm definitely going to remember that. Thank you. I'm a real believer about eating together and, making family time. Yeah, especially as it's Sunday. Okay, so the next one. Somebody here says, I'm due to start Kesimpta. I think I've pronounced that right. Kesimpta injections soon. Does Dr. Boster have any experience prescribing this drug? And if so, what is his view of it? Would he be able to give me any advice on potential side effects?
Absolutely. So you said it spot on, Sean, the Kesimpta. Now, the generic name is complicated, and I did not make it up. It's Oofatumumab. So Try to say Oofatumumab fast a few times. It's rather challenging. Kesimpta, the trade name, is a self-injection taken once monthly for MS. It's a disease-modifying therapy that came out. It was actually launched during the pandemic, believe it or not. And it is a B-cell depleter in the family of ocrelizumab, Ocrevus, rituximab, Rituxan. It depletes adult B cells and is an extremely effective way of managing MS. Now, I do have some experience with the medicine. I was involved in the clinical trials that led to its FDA approval, Asclepios 1 and 2. And in its post-marketing setting, I have certainly prescribed it to a lot of patients. It's a very easy drug to tolerate. Now, if you would like to learn about the medicine Oofatumumab or Kesimpta, you can check out my YouTube channel, type in Aaron Boster Kesimpta, and you'll find a video where I discuss the Asclepios trials and sort of the data behind where I get off saying that it's so highly effective, because I kind of go through with you the rigor of how we led to that decision. It's a very good medicine. It's a highly effective medicine. I think that a lot of the specifics about side effect profile and tolerance are best discussed with your provider or with your MS team, your MS nurse, but I certainly try to go through a lot of those things in that video. Just to make a broad general statement, high efficacy medicine, I'm a big fan. Okay, thank you. I should just say to the audience, actually, there is subtitles at the bottom of your screen and you are able to turn that off. And of course, we are sort of getting into quite technical talk. Obviously, the webinar is recorded and you would be able to watch it back if you can't keep up with some of the what we're talking about. So just wanted to say that. Okay, so Aaron, at the recent webinar, so the one that we had last month, where George Jelinek was talking about the new handbook, he mentioned fasting and cryotherapy, which may be approaches that help people living with MS. What's your opinion on this? So let me focus my discussion on fasting. I think I'm a little bit more comfortable discussing fasting as it relates to MS. So cryotherapy I'll set aside because I don't profess to have expertise there. Okay. If I take 2 steps backwards, it is a fool who thinks that she will control a chronic neuroimmunologic condition with a pill. And the reality is, if you're going to beat MS, if you're going to overcome MS, if you're going to experience recovery, I really think that you have to have a multi-pronged approach. And I really think this is where George was going. And diet is a key element in the success or the failure, I think, of someone living their best life despite having MS. And the more time I spend in the MS space, and I guess I've crested a decade and a half of helping families impacted by MS, the more and more I care about what people eat. Mm-hmm. And recently, and when I say recently, I mean within the last year, I've also become very, very interested in not just what they eat, but when they eat. When they eat turns out to matter. And so it leads me back to the question about fasting. And it's my opinion that intermittent fasting in specific is a biohack, not just for people impacted by MS, but for humans. And it's my opinion that intermittent fasting is very, very safe in the setting of MS. Mm-hmm. Now, just in a quick nutshell, the concepts here are not complex. When you eat some food, particularly a carbohydrate, your insulin level goes up. And insulin is the storage hormone. So when insulin is up, you're telling your body store calories, and it makes it impossible to burn calories, because if you want to store stuff, then you don't want to burn it. And when you eat something and your insulin's up, anything else you eat, you can store as fat or you can burn as fuel. Well, if you are an MS doctor during a global viral pandemic, sitting in front of a Zoom screen, snacking all day long, drinking coffee with cream, and staring and not moving, you're going to raise your insulin level. I raised my insulin level, and I couldn't burn fat, and I gained a lot of weight. So by fasting for 16 hours during the day, I allow my insulin level to fall, and I allow myself to tap into my fat stores, and I have lost a tremendous amount of weight that way. And it's not so much eating certain foods, about when I eat foods. And so I recently have explored this rather extensively. I've done a lot of research, and I feel confident telling you that it's safe to consider something like intermittent fasting with MS. Caveat being, of course, you have to talk to your healthcare provider to make sure that there isn't specifics for you that need to be considered. But speaking generally, it is safe to participate in something like that. And it's a really cool and a useful tool at MS. It makes me frustrated when you tell someone who is using a wheelchair, well, just exercise more. Well, they would love to exercise more. It's very hard to do that when they can't get up and move around. Yeah. And so that's not fair. Intermittent fasting is a way that you can allow yourself to tap into fat burning without having to raise your core body metabolism by running or something. And so I think that fasting is a biohack that absolutely should be considered in the setting of MS.
Can I just ask, just for those that don't know, when we're saying about the 16 hours of fasting, what's the sort of recommended times for that then?
So this is one, there's a million versions of fasting. And the one that I'm most familiar with, and the one that I think is the easiest for a Western audience to adopt, is something called 16-8, where you eat food for 8 hours, and then you don't eat any calories for 16. So if I do this, so for example, for me, I start eating at noon, and I eat calories until 8 p.m. And then I don't eat anything from 8 p.m. until noon. And I don't do any diet sodas or what have you. And then I try not to snack. So even during that 8-hour window, I'm just eating 2 big meals, and it's been super duper. So that's called like 18-6.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to ask about that. We're still on the sort of the food area, if you like. So somebody's put, I often see healthy diets full of fruit and vegetables described as immune boosting. Is this detrimental to MS sufferers, as our immune system that attacks the myelin sheath?
So if a supplement or a mineral or a food stimulated your immune response and got your B and your T cells riled up, that would be bad for someone with MS, because someone with MS has an overly active immune system. So you wouldn't want to stimulate that already overly active immune system. Fortunately, when people say fruits and vegetables are healthy and they boost your immune system, that's not what they mean. It's much more of a colloquial boost your immune system, like give you healthy vitamins and minerals like vitamin C and stuff, but it's not going to make the B and the T cells more activated. So as it relates to fruits and vegetables immunologically, I think there's no concerns. Now, fruits and vegetables are a really healthy food option. And if I can make a plug, I think it's a really good idea to eat colorful fruits and vegetables. You want to eat things that are green and things with colors, and particularly vegetables are lacking from a lot of diets, particularly American diets are low in fiber and low in vegetables. And so adding those in is actually a super healthy option.
Thank you. So this is there's a few parts to this question, but all related. So bear with me. Somebody's read an article from MS UK saying that new lesions can appear on the spine without symptoms, and research is starting to show that lesions can appear in this area without worsening or new MS symptoms. And the findings suggest patients with clinically stable MS should be monitored with MRI scans of the spine to check for asymptomatic progression. The question is, how often should a person have spine MRIs if they have a history of having MS activity in the spine areas?
So that's a great question. So I can share with you from clinical experience that is 100% true. And that the old idea that you can't have a lesion in your spine without a symptom predates high field imaging. So with better imaging, we see lots of stuff, and you can pick up lesions without symptoms. It does happen. I've seen it in my practice. So I can share with you what I do in clinical practice. Before the age of 60, I think it's a best practice to get a brain MRI once a year in someone with MS. And I like to get a cervical spine MRI about every 2, maybe every 3 years. Why? Exactly because of what this person's talking about. The fact that you can, in fact, see lesions in the absence of new symptoms. But there's also other reasons. Human beings have really poorly designed spines. Like if you and I were to design a spine, we wouldn't make it this way. And being upright, we're putting pressure on our spine and our discs can squish and they can push on our spinal cord. And so if somebody with MS has a numb arm, I want to know, is it from a MS lesion or from a disc that's pushing on their neck or from a degenerative? So getting a spine periodically, so I know the baseline, I think is a best practice. Absolutely. And so I would recommend doing that even without symptoms, at least once every couple of years.
Thank you. There's a question just linked to this. So does having lesions in the brain, cervical spine, and thoracic spine mean a stronger likelihood of disability?
Unfortunately, yes, it does. It does mean that. And so if somebody has lesions in their spine, I want them to be much, much more concerned about progression. And I want them to escalate to the most effective drug they're eligible for as quickly as possible.
Thank you. Thanks. Changing tack a little bit here. So somebody has secondary progressive MS, and the last drug that they were taking was Rituzan, and their doctor suggested trying holistic healing, and they would welcome your thoughts on that.
So I'm assuming that the drug was rituximab, which is a cousin of Ocrevus and a highly effective drug, which works both in relapsing disease states and in progressive disease states. And so that would be an outstanding option for someone with so-called secondary progressive MS. Holistic healing sounds like a code for, I don't want to treat you anymore. And that's my concern when I hear that. I'm not saying that's what they're saying. I'm just saying that's my concern when I hear that.
Yeah.
And, let me approach the question slightly from the side. When someone wants to consider alternative medicine, which I will define as something that I was not taught in medical school, it doesn't make it good or bad. It just means I wasn't taught about it. So an example might be acupuncture. I was not trained in acupuncture, which doesn't mean it's not real. It just means I don't know much about it. So when I'm presented with something that is alternative, then I'm okay with it as long as 3 rules are met. Rules. So the first one is it can't be too expensive. And the individual family has to decide if the alternative therapy they're considering is too expensive, right? So I don't know if holistic healing is expensive or not. The second thing is it can't be dangerous. And so there are natural therapies that are very dangerous. I'll give you an example. A moment ago, someone asked about immune boosting fruits and vegetables. Echinacea is a naturally occurring supplement which does boost the immune system, and it will hurt someone with MS. So that would violate Aaron's second rule. Echinacea is a no-no because it's a supplement that could boost the immune system. And third is it can't be instead of something that I know works. So now we come back to the question. It seems nonsensical to me to stop rituximab in someone who is still alive and has MS, particularly secondary progressive MS. And I would, instead of considering an or statement, I would like to consider an and statement. How about we continue rituximab, which has been proven to slow progression in MS, and add holistic healing on top of it? Just my 2 cents.
That's really useful. I'm sure they appreciate that response. I like the and rather than the or. Okay, the symptoms of MS and the menopause seem to be similar. This lady asked, do I wait for the menopause to settle on HRT and then see a neurologist if needed? So hormone replacement therapy.
So that's a very interesting question. I don't think that classic menopause symptoms mimic MS symptoms. There are some overlap with things like fatigue and with sensory changes in skin and stuff. And if you're having neurological symptoms, I endorse seeing a neurologist. And no, I would not wait until menopause has, quote, settled, because what if it's not MS? What if it's something that needs a timely approach? Or if it is MS, what if it's active and we need to do something about it now? So I don't see a high value in waiting. I would explore that in the now. Where I thought she was going with the question is a very interesting literature, which demonstrates something that is bothersome, something that is impacting most women with MS, which is when they have fluctuations in hormones, their symptoms. So on the onset of puberty, with each monthly menstrual cycle, during menopause, during pregnancy, during delivery, during the delivery of the placenta, during breastfeeding, these are all punctuations in a woman's life, which include a change in hormone level, and that can result in an uptick of MS neurological symptoms. And so it is very, very relevant as a gal goes through menopause that we can see an uptick of her baseline symptoms.
Okay. There's a question now around COVID, obviously very topical. This person said they caught COVID and had no symptoms, but their MS symptoms got worse, still having issues with their left side, which is their worst side, especially with walking, and their legs seem to stop working well after walking for a certain period. Is this common after a virus, or could it be a relapse? And is there a good way to recover from it?
Absolutely fantastic question. So a gold star for the question. And I'd like to spend some time unpacking it. So first of all, it's very common what you're describing. I've seen it, dare I say, over 100 times with my patients who have contracted COVID. So very, very common. And what do I mean? What is very common? Someone has COVID and they either have a rough time of it or they don't have a rough time of it, but they clear the upper respiratory tract infection and their neurological status has taken a hit, and it takes a really long time to recuperate. So I want to make some comments about that in general and then specific as it relates to COVID. So when you have a new attack, an MS attack, your naughty autoimmune cells in the bloodstream cross the blood-brain barrier into the central compartment where they find the brain and spinal cord. They think they're looking at a bad guy and they beat it up and they cause new damage via inflammation. And so we'll use as an example, inflammation in the optic nerve, and then you can't see, you have an optic neuritis. And then the inflammation goes away and then you regain function. You can see again. But when I do an MRI of your orbit or when I do an ocular coherence tomography, an OCT test, I can see damage and it's not normal. It's maybe 90% of what it used to be.
Yeah.
Now, when you have an infection, whether that be a urinary tract infection, influenza, the flu bug, whether it's COVID, your body, your immune system is activated. It raises its attention, it raises your core body temperature, it gets all riled up, it gets spun up to fight the infection, and you can see what's called a pseudo attack or a pseudo exacerbation. So pseudo is Greek for similar to, but it ain't. So a pseudo attack is when you again have reemergence of an old neurological symptom. So I use the example of an optic neuritis, not pathologically because of new inflammation. It's because when you raised your core body temperature, you short-circuited that area of damage because it was only 90% as good as it used to be. And that's normally fine unless you're under duress and it short circuits. And that's called a pseudo exacerbation. So when the human is fighting a flu, their old MS symptoms can come back out and wave to them. And then when the infection goes away, they recover. But here's a key learning. It doesn't happen right away. The infection ends on Wednesday. They're not neurologically better on Wednesday, and they're not neurologically better on Friday, and they're not neurologically better sometimes a week or two later. It's not an attack per se, but it's a phenomenon where the functional reserve, the neurological reserve, doesn't bounce back quickly. It takes longer than expected. Extremely frustrating. Now, that was a general comment about pseudo-exacerbation from infection. Now, let me focus our discussion specifically as it relates to COVID. COVID-19 is not the flu, and it doesn't behave like the flu. And in my anecdotal experience, which is not small, it really is nasty amongst people with MS in triggering MS symptoms. And it takes a very long time to recover. I have several patients that have so-called long COVID, where for months and months, their fatigue is through the roof, where they have walking problems, where their balance is kaput. It's really nasty. And unfortunately, I have a handful of patients where the COVID triggered an attack. Now, how do we define an attack? They had a new neurological symptom they had never had before until they had their infection, and so on and so forth. So you're not alone. What you're describing is actually common. And in my experience, you will get better. It's just going to take a lot longer than you expected.
Thank you. And we've had quite a few questions, as you can imagine, around COVID and obviously living with MS. I'm going to move us on to some of the questions that we've had posted live, if I may, just in terms of fairness. So the first question, Aaron, is what is your prescription for fatigue and reduced stamina? I think it's prescription like that.
Sure. That is a fantastic question, because the most common symptom in MS is fatigue. And there isn't one magic silver bullet to fix fatigue. Fatigue most certainly is a multi-pronged approach. If you go to my YouTube channel, I have an entire playlist on fatigue, some videos talking about ways to game out living your best life and fighting fatigue. But just in the sake of the discussion, let's pick 5 things we can do to improve fatigue, because I have 5 fingers on this hand. So the first one is going to be to take a disease-modifying therapy, because there's really good research that people with MS on DMT are less fatigued, statistically so, compared to not being on a DMT. So that's one thing. Mm-hmm. The second thing is to make sure that you're getting adequate quantity and quality of sleep. Now, most people listening to this are not getting adequate quantity and quality of sleep. Adequate quantity means you are budgeting 8 or 9 hours in the sack. Budgeting. So you're not going to bed at 1 a.m. and waking up at 5:30. And quality means you're not getting up 4 times to pee and waking up with spasms and cramps, and you're actually getting restorative sleep. You don't have sleep apnea, restless leg, etc. And all too often, human beings have really, really cruddy sleep and sleep hygiene, including human beings with MS. And so if you are waking up not feeling refreshed, if you're waking up with a headache, then you are not getting restorative sleep. So number 2 is the sleep piece. Number 3 is to exercise as part of your lifestyle. And say, wait a second, did you hear my question? I have fatigue. Yes, I heard your question, but the reality is people with MS who exercise markedly improve their energy levels. And so I'm not asking you to go on a forced march when you're exhausted, but I am asking you to slowly integrate exercise into your lifestyle. We said we would do 5. That was 3. Number 4 will be to remove sugar from your diet. So if you don't believe me, good. I dare you to do it. In fact, I double dog dare you to do it. If you cut out sugar and if you want to take it a step further, processed foods, you would be shocked at the response to your energy. It'll skyrocket. And number 5 is to up your water game, because many of us are dehydrated, and drinking adequate water will increase your energy levels.
Cheers. Really sensible advice there for anybody, I think, those 5. I'm not going to forget these 5, Aaron.
Good.
Okay, somebody said how to manage shaky hands, if possible.
So shaky hands are common in humans. We call that a tremor. And there's a bunch of different kinds of tremor. So when you go to neurology school, you learn about a rubral tremor and an essential tremor and a cerebellar tremor and blah, 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 blah. And so I can't answer the question without seeing it and without having a better understanding of it. Is it active when you're moving or only when you're at rest, or et cetera, et cetera? And so what I would do is I would take a video of the tremor, because most people have a phone that has a camera on it. So when you see it, film it and describe it in the camera and show it to your neurologist. Say, hey, this is bothering me. What is it? And is there a treatment for it? Because very often a pill or even a weighted bracelet or something of this ilk can make it better.
Great, thank you. Somebody's asked, what is your go-to treatment for an acute exacerbation?
My go-to treatment is only after I've done a few things, right? So when someone is having new neurological symptoms lasting longer than a day, or old neurological symptoms that have been gone for a long time and they've come back for longer than a day, I'm worried they might have an attack. So what needs to happen? Ideally, we examine them and we check for a UTI, a urinary tract infection, because they could have a pseudo attack and not realize it. And you want to treat a pseudo attack with antibiotics, not steroids. But let's pretend for the sake of this discussion that we've done those things and we have clarified, yes, this is an attack. My go-to is oral high-dose steroids. Now, I own and run an infusion operation. I have infusion nurses and I can run IV Solumedrol, which is fine, but I would rather give oral steroids because they're equally effective. They're equally as safe, equally as well tolerated. But in the United States, they cost about $40 compared to a couple $1,000s for IV steroids. And so you can take oral steroids in your bathroom, in the tub, or on, at the breakfast table or what have you. And yes, there are some precautions and rules to taking high-dose steroids, but they're typically easily tolerated. So that's my go-to for a first line for dealing with an MS attack and when I say high-dose oral steroids, I'm talking about 1,250 milligrams. In the United States, we only make a 50 milligram tablet. And so that's 25 tablets each morning for 5 consecutive mornings. It's a very, very high dose.
Wow.
Yep.
Okay. That's a lot of tablets, isn't it? Okay. Somebody said that they've been looking into gut health, gut biome.
Yeah, the gut biome. Yep.
Okay. And its connection to brain health. They'd love to hear your thoughts on this with respect to MS and its progression.
So super interesting topic. I do have a couple YouTube videos on the microbiome and gut-brain connection. To speak to it a little bit right now, this is a very disturbing thought, but it's a true statement. We have more bacteria cells in our bodies than eukaryote human cells. That's a fact. We are more bacteria than human, which is really weird. And the majority of those bacteria live in our gut. So our gut is about 27 feet of tubing, and it's lined with billions, with a B, of colonies of bacteria. And those bacteria live in a symbiotic relationship with us. We put food in the tube, they digest the food and eat it and help us break it down and metabolize our food. So we couldn't live without those bacteria. It's like a team kind of sport. Those colonies of bacteria are referred to as the microbiome. That's the fancy pants doctor term for all those colonies of bacteria. And it turns out that in some conditions that the microbiome plays a role in altering the immune response. For example, there are gut autoimmune conditions like ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease, and changes in the microbiome can influence the severity of the Crohn's disease or the ulcerative colitis. It's also very interesting that in MS, the autoimmune condition that we're talking about today, there is a dysbiosis. So that's a doctor term for the microbiome is jacked up. You have the wrong kinds of colonies of cells. Really weird. And that's called dysbiosis. And there is an emerging belief or theory that if we could figure out which are the good bacteria, we might be able to transplant the bad for the good bacteria, and we might be able to alter the immune response. And there are investigations ongoing right now looking into that. There are studies looking at giving people pro or prebiotics, so they actually swallow good bacteria. There's even, dare I describe, fecal transplant trials, which is what it sounds like when you take someone else's fecal material in a pill that is safe or in a suppository, and you introduce their healthy bacteria and to repopulate your gut microbiome. Now, the jury is out, and this is still research, so it's not prime time. And I presently actually recommend probiotics to almost all my patients, but not for an immune reason. I do it for a gut reason. Because people impacted by MS with dysbiosis have horrible constipation, or they have what we call IBS, where they're having diarrhea one day and constipated the next. And probiotics, which changes this dysbiosis to a better microbiome, helps with that a great deal. Great question.
Thank you. I can't believe it. Did you say 27 feet of
Yes.
Wow.
Yep. That's a lot of tubing, huh?
I've learned something else. Well, I've learned lots tonight, but that I'll remember as well. Okay. There's somebody here that says they have, when they take a hot shower, the tingling in their legs intensifies and then fades again.
Yep.
Their question is, does exposing themselves to heat in this way actually cause any damage to their nerves as opposed to just a temporary discomfort? And does this accelerate any progression in the long term by overloading their nerves?
This is such an important question. So let me start by thanking the person that asked this question, because it is a very, very important question to know the answer to. The answer is you can't hurt yourself heating your body up. You cause no damage. All right. So when you get in a hot shower or a hot tub, or if it's hot outside, or if you're jogging and you raise your core body temperature, you can cause your neurological system to short circuit temporarily. And the leg that was numb during the attack that got better can get numb again. But it's not causing damage. And as soon as your body cools back down, it goes away again. And I'll tell a very brief story about a young lady that had a terrible addiction that I could not cure her of. She had an addiction to running. And I tried desperately to get her to not do it, but she was very insistent upon it, and she ran marathons until the MS made her right leg numb, actually very similar to this question. And she stopped running completely, much to her chagrin. And the reason she stopped running was because she thought she would damage her spinal cord. Once I educated her that that she wasn't going to hurt her spinal cord, she re-engaged in running with a very, very small behavioral change. She could cock her head down about 15 degrees so that out of the corner of her eye, she could see her numb leg, because at mile 3, it went numb and she couldn't feel it. She has run marathons that way. I'm very proud that I have pictures of her on my wall in my office. And the whole time she's running from mile 3 to 26, she can't feel her leg. As soon as she finishes the marathon and her body cools back down, she's good in the hood, and you will be too. Very good question. Thank you for asking it.
Thank you, Aaron. Okay. Somebody said, what's your view on vaccination and autoimmunity?
So we have to first ask ourselves, what's the risk benefit of the vaccine in the context of the risk benefit of why we're taking the vaccine? All right. So I'm going to assume that this is a question born out of the current COVID pandemic, right? Because that makes sense. And we have now surpassed 6 million human beings that have died in under 2 years because of this pandemic. And the majority of people that have died are at risk because they have chronic conditions, or they're on immunosuppression, or they're the extremes of age. And it's a abomination. I've lost many patients these past 2 years that should not have died. And a vaccine is a godsend, in the truest term, godsend from God to help us with this pandemic. And I think that it's some of the most important medicine that has graced Earth. Vaccines have done more to cure illnesses than any other therapy on Earth. And the reality is that many of us don't remember the scourges of bubonic plague and smallpox and measles and mumps and stuff. And so the reason I'm saying all this is we have to remember why we're asking someone to take a vaccine. It's to protect them against something that could kill them. or that they could pass on. All right, so that's the background. Now, if you have an autoimmune condition and you take a vaccine, well, there's some specific considerations. And if you take a live vaccine, that's when you take a bug and hurt it, but don't kill it and inject it into you. There's a theoretical risk that it could trigger an infection and then trigger an attack. And that is theoretical. And in fact, outside of yellow fever vaccine, we don't see that. And so in clinical medicine, it doesn't actually even pan out as a problem. That stated, we being MS providers, avoid live vaccines. COVID vaccines are not live, they're dead. So the mRNA vaccines, which are mostly used here in the United States, are dead vaccines. They're not alive, and they don't pose any risk to someone with MS taking them. The vast majority of my patients have tolerated their vaccines without any issue whatsoever, none. And when they have later contracted COVID, they've cleared it, and they look back and think, man, I got away in a really good spot because I was protected. There are a handful of patients, a minority of patients, where the vaccine triggers a worsening of their MS symptoms. And we have to weigh the risk benefit of what happens if they have COVID. Now, I've had patients say, well, I don't want to risk my MS symptoms getting upticked if I take a vaccine. But my immediate counterpoint is, if you get COVID, it's going to be much worse, and it's going to tick your MS much more intensely. And so even that argument falls pale. And so I think that it is a special consideration, and it is something that you need to be talking to your MS provider about. But I would say 9.5 times out of 10, or 9.9 times out of 10, I'm in favor of that person being vaccinated and boosted.
Thank you. There's a question here. Somebody's asked, are there any labs that can monitor MS progression? Is it common for platelets to be low if taking Copaxone? Copaxone.
You said it perfectly. So that's two separate questions. So the first question and the second question we'll just do separately, and we'll do it backwards. So the second question, Copaxone, glutamate acetate, does not lower platelet count. No. So if your platelet count's lowered, I would be worried about something else. I wouldn't consider it to be because of the Copaxone. Copaxone doesn't cross a cell membrane. It doesn't trigger a receptor. It doesn't do anything to your platelets. So it's that. So the first question I just blanked on. Oh my goodness gracious. Sean, please repeat it. I apologize.
Absolutely. So they asked, are there any labs that can monitor MS progression?
It's such a good question. So today, no, there are not. Tomorrow, there will be. And when I say tomorrow, I mean like within the next couple of years. So there is a biomarker, which is really what we're talking about. A biomarker is a way of measuring a disease that's not measuring the human. It's like and so the best biomarker that we have for MS is an MRI, which takes a look at structure. But there is a biomarker that's being developed called neurofilament light chain. Neurofilament light chain is a product inside the axon. So I will use this. Let me grab a wire. There's all these wires around me. So here's a example wire. And let's pretend that this is the axon, okay? And in MS, it breaks. And so when it cracks, all the stuff inside spills out. And so what's inside the axon? These change. Neurofilament heavy chain, neurofilament medium chain, neurofilament light chain. And so all the chains get dumped out into the spinal fluid and make their way into the bloodstream. And it turns out that the neurofilament light chain correlates with disease activity. So the higher the neurofilament light chain in the bloodstream, or the higher the neurofilament light chain in the spinal fluid, the more likely that person has poor control of their disease, the more likely they're going to have an attack, the more likely they're having progression, the more likely they're not going to respond to their medicine. And you imagine a scenario where we draw a neurofilament light chain blood test every 3 months in a human to measure how they're doing and if they're responding to their medicine. Now, it's not prime time yet. We still have a lot of work to do. For example, we don't know the baseline values. We do know that it gets that as you age, your neurofilament goes up. And so we have to have a baseline that changes with age. We also know that other neurological conditions can trigger neurofilament light chain, so a stroke or ALS. So there's still a lot of work to be done, but boy, is it really exciting to imagine that we could get a blood test and give us a sense of if we're winning or not.
We're just going to go back to, and actually there's sort of two questions that are related. So somebody's picked up on something you said earlier about making recommendations for MRIs for those age up to 60. And so they've asked, what about the over 60s? And then there's a question linked to that, but I'll come back to it once you've.
Fair, thank you. That limits my ability to forget. So thank you for that. Now, I was wondering whether someone would pick up on that. Now, this is just Aaron Boster's personal opinion. This is not a recommendation by some organization, I guess, except my organization. And it's my opinion that getting an MRI of the brain every year up into age around 60 is a really good idea. After the age of 60, I think it's a discussion. If the person has had very, very quiet MRIs, then we may start to do MRIs every other year. If they have active MRIs, or if there's another concern which would make us want to monitor, then we're going to continue to get MRIs every year. But it's my experience that at the age of 60, in a lot of patients, we can have that discussion and we might start to do it slightly less often. In the United States, people pay a lot of money for their MRIs through their insurance, or they pay out of pocket. And so it's not a small factor to get a scan. And so I just try to factor in the value of the scan. And I would say the likelihood of catching something decreases with chronologic age. So I draw a line in the sand at 60. And that's just my own opinion. It does not make me right. It just makes me really opinionated.
Surely not. Just linked to that then, Aaron, somebody's asked, is it correct that DMTs are less effective for older people aged 60 plus? So we're staying with that demographic.
So there is a belief that the impact of the disease-modifying therapy is probably less in someone who is chronologically older than younger, which does not mean it doesn't work in that person. It just means it works less well. So if you were going to get a 50% boost when you were in your 20s on a given medicine, and maybe in your 60s, it's only 15%, I don't care. I still want the 15%. And so I don't want somebody to use that argument to suggest that it's therefore not worthwhile treating someone who's over 60, because that's shenanigans. It's very a good idea to treat someone over 60, even if the impact of the medicine is less effective. It's still much better than nothing.
Yeah. Okay. Another person's asked here, another lady said, is it correct there's no medication to help with primary progressive MS? She says her husband was diagnosed at age 62. After a few years of investigation of symptoms, and his walking is being affected more and more now at age 65.
So I'm delighted to share that that's wrong. And that, in fact, there is medicine that has been shown to help with PPMS. So I'm tickled to be able to share that with you. And in fact, I was involved in the clinical trial, the Oratorio trial, where we studied primary progressive MS, and we randomly gave people with PPMS dummy drug or ocrelizumab. And what we found was, if you take ocrelizumab, we could slow disability progression by almost a quarter, 24%, and we could slow brain volume loss by 20%. Now, there's excellent work ongoing looking at the value of giving ocrelizumab to people in wheelchairs. And what we're finding is it maintains hand function and it maintains cognition. And so I would be very keen on considering ocrelizumab. If for whatever reason ocrelizumab wasn't available, I would then apply transitive property of algebra, and I would consider off-label using another B-cell depleter. So I would consider rituximab or Kesimpta Oofatumumab or even Mavenclad. Now that's a very off-label comment. I'm simply sharing that's the discussion I would have in the real world, trying to use a disease-modifying therapy with someone with PPMS. Lastly, there's a wave of technology that's coming and about to crash into the shore. And that's the development of BTK inhibitors, Butyrate tyrosine kinase inhibitors. And these are small molecules that they block B-cell signaling without murder, which is really cool. So they don't increase risk of infection. And they turn off activated microglia, which are cells in innate immune cells in the brain. They hold tremendous promise, in my opinion, for PPMS. And I'm very proud that at the Boster Center, we're doing a clinical trial looking at one of these BTK inhibitors, telobrutinib. In this trial, we're looking at giving people with PPMS this BTK inhibitor to see if we can slow down their disease. And so there's a lot going on to treat PPMS.
Thank you. Just a shift now. Somebody's asked, I'd love to hear if you have any advice on MS and mental health, more specifically, how to handle anxiety related to MS. I mean, we do get a lot of questions actually around sort of mental health and support. So anxiety related to the worsening of symptoms, running out of energy, and the future living with the diagnosis.
So people impacted by MS are twice as likely to experience anxiety compared to the general population. And so I'll start by saying that you are absolutely not alone. You're actually in the majority of humans with MS. Anxiety is a major thing. Now, if you add that to the fact that there's a global viral pandemic, then it would be almost weird not to be anxious, to be transparent. And so if you're experiencing a worsening of your anxiety, your depression, I think that's probably natural. Unfortunately, it can be treated. There are a host of things that we can do to treat anxiety. And in the spirit of fives, I'll list 5 things that we can do. One of them is medicine. And I do not like using the benzodiazepines like Mother's Little Helper, like Valium and Xanax, because they can become addictive and you can develop a tolerance. But more importantly, they make you foggy headed, which is a problem with MS, and they make you tired, which is a problem with MS. So there are other medicines that I prescribe routinely that are not addictive and generally don't have a tolerance. Medicines like Buspar and hydroxyzine, which I give people, and they can take as needed for when they have a panic moment. And I like them to carry the bottle with them in their purse or in their pocket so that it gives them an empowerment, a sense of control, that if they were to start to get anxious, there's also, and this is still, well, so that's number one. That's a medicine to break a panic attack when it occurs. The second thing is there are outstanding medicines in the SSRI and the SNRI class, medicines like paroxetine, sertraline, these are Zoloft, Paxil. These are excellent medicines which can help with anxiety. And so oftentimes we can put someone on a very low dose of these medicines in the background, and it helps manage their anxiety in a very excellent fashion. A third thing is exercise has been shown to help people manage anxiety. And it helps reduce stress, which also can help with anxiety. And so that's an important one. Working with a counselor is brilliant and very, very important and can be done on Zoom. It can be done via telemedicine, because a counselor will help you find these patterns which cause you like a positive feedback loop where you get anxious and it kind of feeds into itself and then you can't break it. And they'll help you identify those so you can break them. Very, very powerful tool, which oftentimes you can't figure out on your own. You can only figure out working with a trained listener. And lastly is that mindfulness that I was talking about. So walking in nature or spending time in nature for 15 minutes, sitting down in your shower and breathing with your eyes closed, something that I do every morning. Turning the radio off when you're driving and really paying attention to the thing around you. These are all opportunities for mindfulness and being in the present moment, and they help reduce anxiety. And I think I finished that question exactly at the top of the hour.
You did. I was just going to add a 6th one there, actually, Aaron, which is about group support. And I wouldn't be doing my job properly if I didn't try and plug and suggest, reaching out to a OMS circle or, somebody else that's obviously living with MS for that sort of group peer-to-peer support. So
very, very appropriate.
Are you okay just for a couple more quick fires and then we'll finish?
Let's do some quick answers. We'll wrap up in a minute or two.
Wonderful. Thank you. There's somebody here who has asked, I've been relapse-free following the OMS program for 10 years. Will my MS be labeled as benign?
The working definition of benign MS is an EDSS less than 3 at 15 years. But I personally don't believe in benign MS. And I would be very concerned about looking at cognition and functions like that and making sure that we're not having some things erode in the background.
Okay, and then best and safest treatment approaches for women during pregnancy and breastfeeding.
So what I assume you're talking about is how do you treat the MS while at the same time you're carrying your pregnancy? And there's several ways to do that. One of my favorite ways is to stay on Tysabri during attempts at conception and during the first and second trimester and coming off halfway through the second trimester. That's very, very off-label. It works great in my clinic. There's a lot of different ways to do it. That's one of my faves.
Thank you very much. Sorry, there was one here which was around talking to healthcare professionals, which I thought was going to be quite appropriate. Bear with me, sorry, Aaron, one more. I can take a deep breath as well.
While you're looking for that, I'll share where people can find me online.
Absolutely, thank you.
On YouTube, you can check out my YouTube channel. It's my name, Aaron Boster, MD. Please jump over there and subscribe and hit the notifications bell. I put out a video every Monday and oftentimes on Thursdays. I also have a presence on Facebook and Twitter. My name, Aaron Boster, MD, as well as LinkedIn. So say hello, howdy, hi, and I'll look forward to hopefully future opportunities with OMS answering your questions the way we are right now.
Thank you, Aaron. I guess just the point to finish on is we get a lot of people saying they find it hard to talk to their healthcare professional, to their neurologist. Any top tips for opening up and making that conversation easier for people?
Yes. Number one, do homework. So I prepare to see you. I go through your scans. I go through your notes. I prepare a list of questions. I prepare to see you. So you should do the same thing. Make a list of your medicines, make a list of your questions, review your questions with your family and friends in your village and make sure you haven't forgot anything. And make it known that you have a list when you go to see the doctor. Say, hey, doc, I have a list of questions, because culturally now she has to listen to your questions. So take a pen and paper and write down the answers as you talk and go through all your questions. Say, doc, I really want to get through my questions today. Another tip is to bring a village member with you, a listener. So bring a spouse or a loved one or a friend, because they are an extra set of ears and eyes. And if you're starting to get stuck, they can maybe chip in and help and answer a question or two. Show up early. You don't want to limit your visit because you showed up late and the doctor had to rush through the visit. So get there an hour early. That way, any questionnaires that you have to complete or testing that you have to do, you can do in a casual fashion and not be rushed. Because when you get rushed, it's harder to remember what you want to talk about. And it affords more time for you to spend with the clinician so that you can have a meaningful interaction. Lastly, is you have to cultivate a sense of selfishness. It's your body and it's your brain. It's your insurance money. It's your life. And you only get to do it once. And so the doctor might be fine with your disability. Are you? The doctor might be fine with not addressing that symptom. Are you? And if you're not, you have to practice saying, excuse me, good sir, but no, I'm not okay with that. And I really need some help. And you have to practice that kind of conversation. But I think those are things that can hopefully help you feel energized and empowered to be able to have a meaningful interaction with your MS clinician.
And I think that's the point actually about tonight. I think people will feel very informed and very empowered by the conversation that we've had. And I just wanted to say thank you so much. It's been really, really interesting as always. The amount of questions we've had on in the background. And I'd just say that we'll be welcoming you back in November. I think we've organised, and obviously we'll be putting out the website, but thank you so much, Aaron. Really appreciate it.
Fantastic organization and wonderful questions tonight. And I look forward to seeing you. It'll be cold outside next time we chat. Take care.
It will be. Thanks, Aaron. Bye.
Bye-bye.
And that's it for tonight. Thank you so much for all your questions, for attending. It's been such a fantastic session, really interesting as always, meeting with Dr. Boster. You will get a pop-up survey as you exit the webinar, and of course we will be sending you that link to play this back. I know there's lots of information to take in there. I will be returning in May with a mindfulness and meditation webinar with Dr. Phil Startin. and also in June with Sam Josephs for an OMS-friendly and family recipe session. So look out for those on your email and, of course, on the website. Thank you so much for attending. I hope you've enjoyed it, and we'll see you soon. Goodbye from everybody at OMS. Thank you.